So I'll just give you a little bit of background on the company. We actually started out life in 2016 as a private company to explore a early stage diamond exploration opportunity in Northwestern Australia. Went public in 2017, and while we had some great technical success, the economic success was not there with it. So we put those projects on care and maintenance with the agreement of the shareholders and turned our attention to acquiring precious metals projects. Initially looking in Northwestern Australia, it was the beginning of 2020, pretty quickly turned our attention to Northwestern Canada or Northwestern Ontario because COVID made it very difficult to look for anything in Australia. So if I'm going to leave you with anything, these are sort of the high points of what we've got going on. We're in a great jurisdiction, Northwestern Ontario, modern health and safety standards, great jurisdiction in terms of land security and rule of law. All of the services that you need are available. So, but not only that, it's a well endowed with gold and clearly a great place to be looking for more gold deposits. In terms of what is the alpha that we're bringing, I think we have some great technical people, which I'll go through, but in conjunction with that, you need good capital people behind you. So we have some great durational capital, and I think we can demonstrate that we have some great people behind the company, particularly for a company with such a small market cap. Our target is similar to Musselwhite, which is a 6 million ounce iron formation hosted gold deposit. It's about 150 kilometers northwest of us. And the projects that we're exploring are early stage, but so they still have all that discovery upside potential, but we know that we're in the right location because there's been previous drilling to tell us that there's high grade gold present. A little bit about the corporate structure. You can see we've got some great names in terms of support. For a company that has a market cap between $8 and $10 million, I think we have a remarkable set of shareholders. Really important in terms of moving the company forward because they'll be there when we go to drill. When we acquired the projects in May, that I'll discuss here in a little bit, we went to the market to raise $900,000 to support that project, or to support the acquisition. We had orders for more than 3 million. We took 2.4 million. And these are some of the names that came in. Now, some of these names were a legacy from the Diamond days, including Eric Sprott. Our largest shareholders, Rosso Asset Management, that's Warren Irwin, and Medalist Capital. And they supported the transition of the company. But as we moved into the gold space, we were able to attract Plethora, Crescat Capital, US Global, and a number of high net worth and family offices throughout Europe. It's an exploration company. We run a very lean operation. I want to see the money go into the ground. It's not a big corporate expense. So I'm the only full-time employee of the company. I share my CFO with another company. So really quite low in terms of the corporate costs. Our directors are truly independent. They're small shareholders, but they're truly independent and have a great set of skills to bring to the table in terms of advice in directing the company. The technical side, I have had 30 years of experience in this business, so I've got some great connections. Some of the people that are really helping and sort of advise the company, the names that you might recognize are Dr. Rob Carpenter. Rob was the founder of a company called Kaminak, which found the Coffee gold deposit in the Yukon and sold to Goldcorp, now Newmont, for a little over $580 million. Rob wrote his PhD on Meliadine, which is an iron formation hosted gold deposit. So this is right up his alley in terms of technical. The other name you might recognize there is John Williamson. He's the founder of the metals group of companies. He's had several successes throughout his career, but most importantly, he's raised over $100 million in the last 18 months. So he's a very astute geologist. I get a lot of good advice from John, but he's also very astute with capital markets as well. The other names there you may not recognize, but they've all been involved in major discoveries. You know, as many of you will know, a major discovery often gets credited to one or two people, but there's always a team of people behind that. So these are what I call my resident propeller heads. So as I mentioned, we started looking for projects in Northwestern Ontario. We started in 2020. The acquisition actually took place in May of 2021. So that 15 months was really spent digging deeply into the historical information in Northwestern Ontario to find that right set of projects. Well, really what we were looking for was something that had enough meat on the bone that we knew we were in the right location, but still had all that exploration upside still available to the company. We started looking at places like Red Lake and Timmins, but these are very crowded locations. It's hard to get a big land position, and if you can, it's very expensive. So we started pretty quickly, focused our attention over to the Miminisca Fort Hope Greenstone Belt. which is about 100 kilometers east of Pickle Lake. This is an area that had been drilled historically, so we knew that we were in the right location in terms of mineralization, but nothing had been really done there since the early 2000s, so it kind of fallen off everybody's radar screen. We identified two projects fairly quickly in our research as Miminiska and Kiezik as being the two most advanced projects in the belt, and they were non-core assets to an AIM-listed company, so we set about trying to negotiate those projects away from them. It took quite a while. The CEO of Landor was a bit reticent, I think, to give up the projects, but we were able to demonstrate we had great access to capital, as you can see in our corporate structure, as well as the technical team to be able to move the project forward. So we announced that acquisition in May of this year, and then set out to raise some money. Initially, as I mentioned, $900,000, had $3 million in orders, took 2.4. But one of the important things was when we told shareholders that when we were acquiring this, that we would be using that money to set these projects up for drilling in Q1 of 2022, rather than going straight away into drilling. So we've been using that money to really just set up so that we have our best shot of success in drilling those two projects. While we were negotiating with Landor to acquire those projects, we acquired the Atwood Project through our own research. We identified this as an earlier stage opportunity, but very compelling in terms of the technical support. So it was a nice fit to the two more advanced projects, and we can work on that project and develop targets fairly inexpensively. So Miminiska is the most advanced of the two projects that we're acquiring from Landor. And as you can see here, some of these are, I've presented some of the drilling results from historical drilling. The discoveries were made in the 1940s. There was a second round of drilling in the late 1980s, and a little bit of drilling at the beginning of the 2000s. They were discovered simply because they're outcropping, they're on the shore of a lake. And so all of the focus that has been from previous companies has been very narrowly focused on where the discoveries were. And not a lot of work had gone in terms of drilling deeply or drilling to laterally. Almost all of the holes that have been drilled here are less than 150 meters, and they're angle holes. So that means they're really only testing the top 100 meters. But as you can see, we're talking about mineable widths and mineable grades. When we start drilling in 2022, this is where we will start drilling. We're pretty confident that we can grow ounces by drilling both laterally as well as vertically. Kiezik is the second project that we're acquiring from Landor. It's earlier stage. No work has been done here since the late 1980s. But again, we're looking at mineable widths and mineable grades in the drilling that was done. And all that drilling, as you can see here with where the stars are, is really towards the south end of the property. And that's because, again, there's a big lake there, there's lots of outcrop to see, and that was really what they were focusing on. But you can also see that this sort of northwest trending geological feature here is actually a major shear structure. It's regional, runs right up to the Musselwhite Mine, which is about 150 kilometers to the northwest of us. So that's great in terms of the plumbing for the mineralization. There's also a lot of iron formation here that's been folded and folded again, faulted extensively and sheared. So these are all sort of good structural setups for getting that mineralization into the rocks. The prospecting that was done by previous explorers, because there's a lot of cover here, there's not a lot of exposure, but where there was exposure, they were finding gold mineralization associated with the iron formation. So again, there's a lot of prospectivity here. We spend a fair amount of time here in October doing prospecting, sampling of both soils and bark to develop targets that we'll drill a little later on in 2022 after we've drilled at Miminiska and Front. Acquisition terms, obviously very important. We're paying a little over $4 million for the two projects over the course of 2 years. Our payments are made on 6-month intervals. There's a cash component which is fixed. I think what's important here is that it's not heavily loaded at the back end. There's also a share component. We can pay in cash or shares at our election. We might have at some point want to bring in a strategic shareholder or something like that, so it might make more sense to pay cash rather than shares. The other thing that's important to note is that we can accelerate payments at our election as well. So if we have a great round of drilling and we get a bit of a lift in our share price, we can take advantage of that and issue shares with a little bit less dilutively. There's a 2% net smelter royalty to Landor. We can buy back 1% of that for $1 million at any time. So those are pretty standard terms in terms of the royalty side. Atwood is the project that we acquired ourselves, so we staked this ourselves. There's no underlying deal, there's no underlying royalties. It's earlier stage, but as I mentioned, we can develop targets here inexpensively while we're exploring the other two projects. There's some great compelling information in terms of base metals, and also there's a lot of iron formation here, so that's been faulted and folded. So again, we can develop precious metals targets here. We can do it fairly inexpensively while we're exploring the other two projects. So it was a nice addition to the package of land. ESG, obviously very important and increasingly important as we go through time. One of the great things here is that we're dealing with one First Nation. Some of our colleagues to the south are dealing with 3 and 4 First Nations. That makes it fairly complicated to get everybody in the same page, but we're dealing with one First Nation here. We acquired Atwood before we acquired the two projects from Landor, so my relationship with the First Nations started early in the year. It's been very positive. I think that they feel like they've kind of missed out. There's not been a lot of exploration in this part of the world for the last 20 years, but there's been exploration up north in the Ring of Fire, to the west in Red Lake, so they're sort of feeling like they missed out. But obviously it's a very important, it's a fairly simple formula when you're dealing with First Nations from my perspective. You go in with lots of respect, you communicate regularly, and you offer opportunity as soon as there is some. And of course for us that makes a lot of sense. The Yabamatong, which is the First Nations community, is part of the Matawa group of communities, and they've done a lot of training. So there's drillers offsides, there's soil samplers, there's line cutters that we can access, and that means I'm not flying people from elsewhere in Canada, I'm hiring locally, which is always a great situation. So as I mentioned, when we raised the money in June, we were very clear with the people who we were raising money that money would not be spent on drilling. It was going to be spent setting up the company so that we would have the greatest chance of success at drilling. So the first thing we did was just compile all that historical information into one database. Then we flew a very detailed airborne survey and the first ever LiDAR survey in the area. And that was really to identify that iron formation, but also find all the faulting and the folding and the shearing. That's complete. We then went into the field in October after having all that information and data in hand to develop those targets that we would want to drill a little later on in 2022. The last thing that we're doing is that the Landor had about 3,000 meters of core from the Miminiska project in Thunder Bay. So we were able to capture that core into our own facility. We're re-logging it. I'm sure you can appreciate that with all the different successive programs, there's been a lot of different geologists on there, and where you might have only supposed to have 4 or 5 different kind of geological units, there's 20. So we're homogenizing the geology, simplifying the model, and also looking at it from a sort of new eyes. Having a chance to look at the mineralization, you can understand how the mineralization works, and that really sets us up to understand what are the best geophysical techniques for us to develop targets for drilling in 2022. We'll go back to the market either late this year or early in the new year once we've developed those targets and we can demonstrate how we believe we can grow ounces, particularly at Miminiska, and we'll use that to raise money for the drilling that we go in 2022. That concludes the presentation. I'm not sure if I'm out of time, but happy to take questions if there are any. I think the main takeaway for us is that where we see sulfide mineralization, there is gold associated. We have not yet seen any sulfides in the rocks and that have gold associated with it. And where there is no sulfide, there is no gold. So one of the interesting things for us particularly is that no airborne EM and only a very small ground EM survey was completed over the target. And so this is obviously going to be an incredible tool where we have coincident magnetic anomalies, so that's the iron formation, and conductivity that will really speak towards mineralization, and those will be the drill targets. So pretty simple. I mean, there's no rocket science here. These are pretty simple targets, but you just need to use that sort of consistent methodology and systematic nature to define where those targets are.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much.